Hi, a warm fall season welcome. This is Policy for Normal People podcast. It's a pleasure to have my listeners and viewers with us tuning in today. And our topic today is a very exciting one for me, near and dear to my heart, nonprofit governance. And I'm very honored to welcome Bill Peck as my guest today. We're going to jump into this topic very soon, but before we do, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to 6 Half Dozen. The studio we're in today is thanks to them, our business collaborating partners. They are a full-service audio-visual design studio. They do fabulous work both locally here in my resident city of Alexandria, Virginia, which is very near Washington, D.C., but also serving clients nationwide. Check them out, 6halfdozen.com. So, Bill, it's really a pleasure to have you with me today.
Thank you.
Bill Peck is a nonprofit advisor for my listening and viewing audience. I feel like we've been leading up to this for quite a while now, so I've had a chance to really get to know you and know your background and experience. But for our listening and viewing audience, can you just share with us real quick, your experience with nonprofits, and I know you've worked with a lot of boards.
All right. Well, thank you, Christy. I appreciate that. I've been looking forward to our time together. So I've worked in the nonprofit space for about 30 years now, either as a nonprofit executive director or in the C-suite level, and also consulting and working for a variety of nonprofits. I started my career off in the nonprofit space by working with domestic violence and sexual assault victims in Michigan. And then over the years, I've kind of moved from Michigan to Colorado to different states and ended up in this space, always though focused on community impact, whether it's about food scarcity or helping kids increase the schools increase their graduation rates, and I said earlier, domestic violence and sexual assault. So it's been really a big part of my career in terms of making a difference in community.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about yourself, Bill. And, there's a lot of intersection between what you and I have done with nonprofit work from different angles and spaces. Myself, my consulting firm, which sponsors this show, Policy for Normal People, Amada Development Services, is a marketing, consulting, and fundraising service. But long before that, I worked, as a development officer and in various capacities in marketing and so forth with similar mission-focused nonprofits, conservation, certainly a little bit with domestic violence, and very recently wrote a grant for the Center for Urban Sustainability here in the DC area to address food insecurity and food deserts for children. So we have a lot in common, and even so, I know I'm going to learn a lot from you today, and I know our viewers and listeners are too. So if you're ready, let's just dive in.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see where we can take this.
Okay, so I've kind of, I've got 5 big questions that I hope we can expand on. And honestly, Bill, this is an important and timely topic, I think, don't you? I mean, I know there's a lot of concerns, some insecurities. We're seeing a lot of shifting and changing from the federal government into state level policy making, cuts in funding. So I know that there's a lot of nonprofit leaders that if you're watching this today, what we hope you'll take away from it, and I know I'm interested too, for sure, to learn more about what boards can do to provide the kind of leadership that will sustain their organizations to continue achieving in this volatile time. And my first question surrounds the issue of, how to navigate policy volatility. So, as I said, policies, funding priorities, they're shifting rapidly, and from federal deregulation to state-level program cuts. My question for you, Bill, is how can nonprofit boards and executive teams also adapt their government structures to stay mission-aligned, but also be flexible in this sort of unpredictable environment?
Well, absolutely. And this particular situation is more dramatic than in years past. But if a nonprofit has got a sizable portion of its budget that's dependent upon public funding, then definitely requires the organization to really be nimble. And that's the word that we're going to talk about a couple different times during our visit, is being nimble. Now, what does that mean? That means being realistic. That means keeping an eye on the environment. In fact, some nonprofits actually create what's called a strategy team. Strategy teams, a small ad hoc group, could be board members, could be individuals from the community as well, but just really taking a look at an environmental scan is another term that's used, but what's happening in our community, whether it's locally or geographically or state-wise, and things that we need to be aware of relative to our mission, relative to the services, such that if we need to shift, we've got an ability, we've got some information to be able to take a close look at and then reevaluate our direction or delivery of service. So it's very important for organizations to be nimble, also to have a diverse group of individuals, whether they're board members or community advocates, working together such that they can really take a hard look at strategy alignment or realignment.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it's really, you've got to balance the focus between the macro environment and the micro environment, right? And it's super important to understand both.
Completely, especially an organization, like I said, that's very dependent upon public funding, such that they're not in a position where they have significant decrease or loss of funding and then go, now what? And have to significantly retrench, which impacts the constituents they serve. It could very well shut down programs or the agency itself.
Yeah, and I can completely appreciate how important that is to stay ahead of the game. I mean, you can't wait until the crisis happens. You've got to be prepared at all times. I've said and tried to say so gently at times on my LinkedIn posts and places where I'm talking about this issue that, it's really sad, but there's a lot of shuttered doors out there already where nonprofits may have been a little bit too reliant on one source of funding. So diverse, just like your financial portfolio. It seems to me that boards play a huge role in helping their organizations remember and execute that.
Exactly, and then that also requires boards to be paying attention and being aware and being informed. And not just showing up for the board meeting or showing up for committee meeting and then following the direction of staff. So
yeah, you kind of read my mind there, and I know we'll get on. We're going to move on, but I've worked for organizations where you saw the visibility of the board. They would come in. Really good boards would know all of the staff. Doesn't matter what your role is. If it wasn't just the executive team or the president or CEO. And that really meant something. But I've also worked for some organizations that were lacking in this way and really had a kind of a distance from the daily goings on other than just the CEO or president's report. And I think that, that speaks to a little bit of what you said in broader context. So let's move on to governance and risk management, as sort of a subtopic. In times of policy uncertainty, what role should nonprofit boards play in managing organizational risk? And specifically, I'm thinking it's going to include both financial as well as their reputation. I work in crisis communication, so I think about these things, helping nonprofits get a crisis communication plan before the crisis happens, right? Just to repeat the question, in times of policy uncertainty, what role do you think nonprofit boards should play in managing their organizational risk?
Boy, that's a huge question, not only because of the current environment, but just in general. And I've had the pleasure of consulting with small and larger organizations and wonderfully high-functioning boards, as well as the other end of the spectrum. And so what I will say across the board is that the board of directors has the fiduciary responsibility for the organization and shouldn't get too comfortable. In that, if things start to go poor for the organization or agency, whether it's it's a small agency or a larger agency, it falls on the shoulders of the board to know what's going on, and if they don't, to ask what's happening, why are we in this position, how did we get here, such that everybody can work together to figure out what the go forward might look like. But for me, the bottom line is, and when I've done interviews with board members, is I've asked a lot of questions with regard to communication. And who are you communicating with, how often, when does your committee meet, when don't they meet, why don't they meet? And who's really providing the information that helps you make quality decisions, and not just at the board meeting, but prior to that. So in my 30 years of experience, that just comes to the surface on a regular basis, is advising boards not to get too comfortable, make sure that they understand the policies, make sure they understand the financial position.
Do you ever run into a situation, or have you, where there's a disconnect between understanding the difference between executive team management versus board governance? And they're very different, right?
No, very much so. And I think one of the clues, if you're sitting in on a board meeting, is that board members start asking operational questions. Well, who was at the warehouse recently, and have you checked the inventory? And do we have a good security system at the warehouse? And are the doors locked on a regular basis? That really should not be, unless it's a very small, nonprofit. Everybody is involved in the day to day. But typically, that is like you just said, that's a staff function. So what should be what should the board be talking about? It should be talking about safety, security. What are our policies with regard to making sure that our staff are safe at all times, let alone, what our assets are.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that. It's a very important distinction for sure. Moving on to accountability and transparency. This is a tough one, I think. Leadership, everybody is in a job where, let's just be honest, we want to protect our jobs. There's a natural instinct in all of us as human beings, but leadership that really stands out in my mind is a leadership that can accept and acknowledge where they may need to make changes, where they have faltered or something. So a little bit of that in here possibly. But my general question to you, as public trust in institution fluctuates, and we're definitely seeing that now, as you said, it's just, I think it's fair to say it's a pretty unprecedented time, or at least it's been a long time. How can nonprofits strengthen government practices that reinforce transparency and accountability, not just to regulators and funders, tend to think of that first, but to also the communities they serve? How can they find that balance?
Well, and it's always going to be finding the balance because circumstances change, and not just from year to year, but this day and age, almost month to month.
Right.
I think the board can be very supportive of the organization by helping them think through strategy with regard to telling their story. And that's where the impact happens. It's one thing to say, hey, we believe we're a great organization, but it's another thing to say, let us show you the impact that we're making in community, whether it's an environmental issue or animal welfare, or, making sure that children go to school and are fed and not worrying about being hungry. So I think that issue of making sure that you are telling your story, not just once a year, but on a consistent basis, and letting the public and your constituents, your supporters, advocates, donors see the good work that you say you're doing, but really see the good work that's happening.
I love that. And I'm going to fully admit, I'm partial to the whole, success is as good as the story you tell. And I'm a storyteller too. I love, telling a great story about the success that nonprofits make in their communities, whether that's local, national, international. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It is not something where you just tell one story and you have your mission and vision statement and that's your story. That isn't your story. That's the start of your story. But absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So I did want to ask, in relationship to that question before we move on, can you think of any examples of boards, obviously I'm not asking for names, that have successfully balanced compliance with their authentic community engagement, where you feel that authenticity, you see it? Can you think of a particular example?
Well, let me sort through many of them, but no, that is, and I would say that one comes to mind as we're just chatting here and thinking in the moment of a organization in North Carolina that I consulted with, and they were a sports-based organization. I'm not going to name names, but they ran around the court with rackets and chased this little yellow ball, But anyway, they were
probably better than I could,
and much better than me. But they were really focused on raising funds to build a larger facility that would honor historically people in the state that had a significant impact on tennis programs, particularly for youth. And so they did a phenomenal job of identifying young people in the community that didn't have resources, didn't have traditional access, didn't have the funds in the family to pay for tennis lessons and the right shoes and the right racket and so forth, and we're able to tell stories about children in different communities, different cities across the state, not just in affluent communities, but in the poorest of poor communities, where they were making a difference and providing an opportunity for young people to be engaged, to be sometimes off the street, to be involved with role models. And so those stories, it's just such a good job of talking about
Story.
young people and the difference they were making.
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, those are the kind of things that pull at the heartstrings, right? And you just think about the interconnectivity and everything, every moving part, every logistical piece that has to be in place, and all the people involved to make that happen. And the board is at the front of that, helping spur that along. So their role from top to bottom is very important. Let's move on to, if we may, leadership and board diversity. I have particular interest in this one too. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly all the way around, and I'm sure you have too in your 30 plus years of experience. So, particular question: many nonprofits are being called to ensure governance reflects the communities that they serve. We've talked a little bit about some of the successes in that. In your experience, how diverse does a board need to be? When we're talking about, say, lived experience relative to the mission, their skill sets, maybe their perspectives overall. How diverse should it be to influence a nonprofit's ability to navigate, especially times like now, volatile political and funding?
Well, and diversity means a lot of things in this day and age, as well as to, a nonprofit. So it's important the nonprofit really ask themselves, what is the community that we represent, whether it's locally or nationally or, county or state, but really who do we serve? And do we have a board of directors that's reflective of our constituents from a standpoint of understanding cultural issues, as well as identifying with the community that's being served. So I work with boards on a very regular basis about diversity across the board, culturally, economically, education-wise, where does one live, gender, so forth, because that adds insight for discussion as a board is making decisions. I find that boards that are not diverse and don't come close to representing the community that they serve, and I ask the question, well, what's got in the way of you being able to do that if truly you want to do that? And it usually boils down to convenience. We interviewed a variety of people, but if your intent and your policy is really about being intentional for diversity, you take the time to identify and zero in on candidates that are going to be a good fit for your organization versus making a convenient choice.
I appreciate those comments, Bill, a lot, because you're right. There's lots of ways to look at diversity. And I know some of the ways that I've seen it play out, good and bad, but sometimes you get people very passionate, just like, your donors would be, the reason for giving, who are on boards because they really do care about the mission. I don't think anybody serves on a board, hopefully not, that is not doing it for the right reasons. Let's just assume that and hope for, for the best. But even so, even with certain skill sets that bring something to the table, don't you think it's also really important that they are committed to and understand what it means as a board member to serve the entire mission? Lots of organizations, especially larger nonprofits, have multiple programming focuses. And I've found in my experience sometimes that you'll get a board member that's only interested in one of those. And that's what they tend to, focus on. So do you agree? You've got to be open to.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the reality as you recruit talent and people are really passionate and interested in the cause of the mission of the organization. And they're going to always be, pet programs that they're attracted to and just resonates with them more so than a few others. But as a board member, they're looking at the big picture and how can we help and strengthen all elements that are critical to the mission of the organization, including the programs I may like a little bit more and so forth. So I think that happens at the interview stage when the board selection committee, as well as when the CEO is interviewing individuals to be candidates for their board, is to really ask those questions and make sure they fully understand, here's who we are, here's who we serve, here's what our mission is.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, I've seen lots of opportunities out there for boards to get further training too. We talk about continuing education all the time for staff, even executive leadership. But there's certainly opportunities, aren't there, for board members to do that as well?
Completely. And you don't have to be a large organization with a significant budget to be able to talk about board development.
Oh, that's good.
There are free resources, and there are individuals in the community that like what you do as an organization that would be willing to donate some of their time. Specific topics for training. There's also the community college. There's also the nonprofit organizations from state to state, nonprofit governance, for example, that provide classes and training. So even if you can't afford it, there's options to be able to tap into resources to help strengthen your ability to serve.
And I'm betting that William Peck Consulting can help with that.
Oh, just so yeah, absolutely.
Of course, yeah, I'm sure. Well, we're coming to our final question. I could do this all day, honestly. I mean, this is very important information. As I said, it's timely. The future of nonprofit governance. Looking ahead, what shifts, Bill, do you predict in nonprofit governance models in particular? How boards define impact, oversee their strategies, engage with public policy. We have government roles and social services that are really changing. What do you predict in terms of the shift in governance models?
Well, let's take a kind of a big view, top-down view at that. And there's a word that we talked about right in the beginning, and that's nimble. A board of directors being able to be nimble and sometimes having to lead the way for the organization. But there's two other words I think that are really important that's going to represent survival as well as being able to strengthen nonprofits going forward, and that's partnerships and then collaboration. There isn't a single nonprofit out there that's got the resources, finances, or whichever to be able to do it all. But I also think in terms of surviving and growing, that this really is an opportunity, even though it might be painful, really look at building collaborations, building partners with other organizations so that you can combine your resources and just deliver on what your promises are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's tough to go it alone, It's much better to find like minds, So this brings us to the end, folks, of our Policy for Normal podcast for this session. And Bill, gosh, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And I do not want to forget to thank Bill further for being a co-sponsor of this episode. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
I'm just delighted to have you here. And I want to invite you back. Would you be interested in coming back?
Oh, absolutely. I think we could take a look at any one of these subjects and do a much deeper dive and also really talk about some personal experiences that we've had.
I agree. I totally agree. I was thinking that, as we were diving into some of these, I'm like, oh, and I want to ask this question or maybe this one, but knowing we need to move on. So yeah, let's do that. Well, folks, stay tuned with us. You can visit my YouTube channel. Just look me up at Christy Amada or Policy for Normal People, and you'll find us there. You can catch previous episodes for different policy-related topics. How do we reach you, Bill?
So, great question. And the easiest answer is we're all engaged in social media in one form or another. Check me out on LinkedIn. So simply search for William Peck and you'll find my full profile there.
Fantastic. All right. Wonderful. Friends, this concludes our discussion of nonprofit governance for today. Really, really appreciate you, our audience, for tuning in. And again, special shout out and thank you immensely to our business partners and collaborators at 6 Half Dozen, 6halfdozen.com. Bill, thanks again.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, everyone, please be well, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.